No clever intro required for this one. Ohio State, Alabama national championship game. There you go. We got Pat Murphy on the line as we typically do from Buck Nuts. He does a tremendous job filling us in on Ohio State football. Please join him and the rest of the staff there at 247 Sports. Buck Nuts. How you doing today, Pat?
I'm good. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. So this is what they play for. And even at a place like Ohio State, where that's the goal each year, go play for a national championship, it's still, when it finally gets here, is like, wow, this is big. This is enormous. This is huge to finally have reached the goal. And even for the fan base, it's been 6 years since Ohio State's made the national championship game.
Yeah, it feels weird to say that 2014, I guess it was the start of 2015, was 6 years ago. It just doesn't seem that long ago. But I think at the time, it was the first college football playoff, and Ohio State obviously made it and proved that they deserved to be there in that one. And I think fans thought, okay, this is going to be an every year thing, almost what Alabama has been, that these would be, the matchups that you'd see every year. And they've been in the playoff most of the years, but it hasn't been kind of this sustained success at that level for one reason or another. And you can point to various things throughout the seasons. And there was certainly opportunity this year to, have hiccups, or, at one point it didn't look like there was even going to be a season. So the fact that they've gotten back to this point, not only that you're back in the national championship, but kind of everything this team's been through is pretty remarkable. I think there's obviously the detractors that say they've only played 7 games, but the fact that they got 7 games in is an accomplishment in and of itself, I think, from the Ohio State perspective.
Pat, there's so much focus on the matchups, of course, and the game that's going to be on the field that is preeminent. That's all that matters in the here and now. But if you drop back and take the big picture perspective, I will argue that there's not a matchup in college football that could exceed this one, both from the standpoint of where the programs stand currently and then historically. You combine those two things, and I don't think you can come up with a matchup that's more of a marquee, big name, big brand matchup than Ohio State and Alabama.
Yeah, and especially given people were probably sick of seeing Alabama and Clemson play each other. And I think if you look back to the college football playoff games, maybe besides one of those Alabama Clemson games, the best game is probably that Sugar Bowl in 2014 between Ohio State and Alabama. And, it's because these two teams recruit so well, develop so well, are coached so well, that, you get these kind of matchups when on what's been infrequent times that they've met on the football field. So, it's a giant in the sport in Alabama in the past, however long it's been since Saban's been there. And then Ohio State, which is consistently a name, and from a rating standpoint, if you're ESPN, I don't think you could have asked for anything better here, especially in a year where, you could certainly use a ratings boost. This was exactly what you wanted to get is these two programs, and especially Ohio State coming off a big win against Clemson, because that gives people more confidence that the Buckeyes will at least be in this game. And if they just squeaked by Clemson or something like that, maybe people aren't as excited to watch Ohio State supposedly get beat down by Alabama. But I think people expect this to be a good game, and therefore, that builds on the excitement.
Yeah, and just to wrap up my point, folks, go to any metric, Google any metric historically, wins, winning percentage, national championships, conference championships, All-Americans, on down the line. These are the two that rank near the top. Pat Murphy on the line from Bucknuts, 247 Sports, joins us on a regular basis for Ohio State football updates, and this being the football update because this is why they play a national championship game against Alabama. So the concern from week to week for the entire season has been a COVID outbreak and a possibility that a game would be canceled. And here we are with the game being played. And there being rumors out there that Ohio State is having issues from that situation. We want to let people out there know that we cannot provide any specific information because it's not going to be released to anyone until like 90 minutes before kickoff. But you've certainly had the conversations with players and with coaches. So what are they saying about what are possible issues?
Well, I think there's a couple things at play here, and I don't want to disparage anyone's reporting of what's happened, what they were told from sources and whatnot. The initial report I think came from AL.com, and I know that they do a great job covering Alabama and Auburn and all sorts of other sports down there. So if I don't want this to come across that I'm taking anything away from that, but when that report came out, Gene Smith came out with a statement to the local media. Our plan is we're planning to play on Monday. Ohio State has kept practice going, kept the facility open, and continued on the scheduled plan to be ready to play Monday. We've had our normal interviews with the guys. No one has been pulled out. The only exception was they moved Justin Fields from Monday to today, and I imagine that was because they were looking at what happened to him in against Clemson. So everything I'm hearing is that they are on track to play on Monday. This report of, and there's been other reports, it's not just the AL.com report, that there's a COVID outbreak that could affect an entire position group. I don't know where that's coming from. Ohio State has been as careful as anyone about how they've handled this situation. Going back to the game they canceled against Illinois, they didn't hit the Big Ten threshold in that game. They decided not to travel to Illinois for safety reasons. So, I don't see Ohio State leaving the facility open if there's anything that a mass outbreak, so to speak. So that's from what we're hearing, what I'm understanding about this situation standpoint. The players, the coaches are all saying they're ready to play Monday night. Ryan Day said today, he was asked, his first question was, are you guys still on track to play Monday night? And he said, certainly. And then he was asked later about how many players they would have available. He didn't give a number, but he said, we'll have plenty of guys, or we'll have plenty of players. So, that's a pretty straight statement from Ryan Day. And it just doesn't sound to me like this is going to be an issue. Will Ohio State have guys out? It's quite possible. It's been 6 weeks or so that this has been in the program, and they've missed guys the last 3 games. But the report of a massive outbreak, is contrary to what I'm hearing and everything Ohio State's saying.
Yeah, hopefully that is the case, and that we have all the pieces in place on the field on both sides, because people want to see teams at full strength playing. We got Pat Murphy on the line from Bucknuts 247 Sports. It's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, best discussion, debate, and analysis. That's our aim. That's our goal. That's our mission. So lock it in here with a subscription. Hit that bell for the notifications. That way you know when we're going live and post content. All right, let's start from the top. Justin Fields made, and I will say this in a sports context, a heroic performance. Aside from the hit, that was a legendary performance in Ohio State football lore. Then you tack on the hit that he sustained in the second quarter, and it was just remarkable what he pulled off in a game that I don't know that the stakes could have been higher, considering what happened last year and throughout history against Clemson, and just flat out, it's a playoff game. Can you add anything more to what has been said about Justin Fields? Because I thought it was amazing, considering all that I just mentioned, plus on top of that, the scrutiny and criticism of his play coming in, and he just comes through in the clutch. Yeah,
it was a performance to remember for sure. He completes, it throws 6 incompletions, which was the same amount of touchdowns he threw. Throws for 385 yards in the biggest game of the year, after being doubted and coming off his worst game of his career, frankly, at least at Ohio State. So, it was remarkable to see. You mentioned the injury, and I think also, he's going not head to head, but matched straight up with Trevor Lawrence, who's a guy that he's been directly compared against since high school. They grew up, 15, 20 minutes away from each other in Georgia, and they've known about each other for a long time. The number 1, the number 2 recruits in the country, all of that stuff. So it's been a long time coming for Justin Fields to outduel Trevor Lawrence. You go back to last year even, and the game that these two players played against each other. So yeah, there was certainly a chip on his shoulder, I think, going into that game, and I think you saw that. I think you saw the motivation. of him to not only play well, but after he takes that hit to get back in the game. A lot has been made of the fact that what's going to happen this week and whatnot, if he's going to be available. He only missed one play, and he only missed that one play because he had to get medical attention and was required to come out. So I think it's been remarkable to see this side of Justin Fields. This is the quarterback that they recruited, that Georgia recruited, and then Ohio State brought in, and playing on the biggest stage. And I think he still feels like he has something to prove in this national championship game when it comes to making sure he's the top guy for or one of the top guys for the NFL draft next spring.
Yeah, Trevor Lawrence, of course, considered the number one guy, and then Justin Fields outduels him. I'm not going to make it a boxing match. It's a football game, and other players are involved, but he certainly stepped up to the challenge, and the Ohio State defense at least contained Trevor Lawrence. Now we move on to a matchup where I'm not going to sell Mac Jones as some Cinderella story. He wasn't like he was a two-star or anything like that, but didn't come into college football with the expectation of a Justin Fields or a Trevor Lawrence. Following Tua Tagovailoa was not, the marquee guy that people had all these expectations, but man, he is playing lights out as well. Has there been any talk within the media or the discussions that you've had with players and coaches concerning, Mac Jones versus Justin Fields now?
Yeah, a little bit. And, I think guys tend to shy away from that just because, in football, you don't go head to head. It's offense versus defense and whatnot. So you don't see those direct matchups. But sure, that's been talked about a little bit. The one thing I think with Mac Jones is, you mentioned he wasn't this high profile recruit, and he's surely out performed those expectations. But if you go back and look at the high school he went to, they played out of the wing T offense. He wasn't getting a lot of opportunity to show what he could do. He mentioned this week that he played 7-on-7 with Ohio State cornerback Shaun Wade. They're both from the same area in Florida, around Jacksonville. And Shaun Wade then talked about his memories of Mac Jones, and just that he can make every throw, and he can do all the things. He's not a dual threat quarterback, but in terms of his arm, he's got the talent there. So I think it's interesting just because a guy like that, committed to Kentucky, probably under recruited just because the offense he was in, still somehow ends up at Alabama. And credit to the Crimson Tide for identifying him, and fights his way into this job. I mean, let's not forget there's a 5-star kid right behind him, a true freshman that came in, and they had a quarterback battle this year. He held Bryce Young off. So I think Mac Jones, despite what the recruiting rankings might say, has proven this year what a player he is, and he has tons of weapons. I mean, and so does Justin Fields. I mean, I'm not trying to disparage Mac Jones, but that certainly makes life a little bit easier when all you need to do is get the ball to those guys and let them go to work. But he's done that, and that's really all that Alabama asked him to do this year.
So you make the connection there, Pat, between Shaun Wade and Mac Jones. Did in your conversations run across any other player connections, coaches connections that are significant?
There are a couple that were brought up throughout the week. I don't know if any of them were significant. I think one of the Ohio State offensive linemen or someone may have played with someone on Alabama, but nothing of note. Kevin Wilson's been in the business so long, he seems to know everybody. When he's talking about coaches on the other team, he refers to them by just their first name. He did that today when talking about Pete Golding, the defensive coordinator for Alabama. He just said Pete, and then had to hesitate. And Pete Golding, the defensive coordinator. So, it seems like anytime we talk to Kevin Wilson, he knows somebody coaching on the other side of the ball. But yeah, there haven't been a ton of connections, between guys that at least were talked about throughout this week.
Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down the national championship game, Alabama, Ohio State. Pat Murphy on the line, joining us from Bucknuts, as he does on a regular basis. Please join his work and hit that bell for the notifications once you have subscribed here. All right. Mac Jones made the comment this week, and this says a lot considering they faced a Texas A&M defense that was a top 5 to 10 unit in the nation, and a Georgia defense that through much of the season most people considered to be arguably the best in the nation. Mac Jones made the comment that this is going to be the best defense that he's seen this year.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting because, as you and I have detailed throughout the season, I'm not sure Ohio State's defense quite qualifies for that. The rush defense certainly does. I wrote about that this week, how good both teams have been really against the run. It's the pass defense that both teams have struggled with. And Alabama's been better, especially of late. Take out that SEC championship game, but they were going against a Heisman Trophy caliber quarterback in Kyle Trask. I think the niceties leading into these games are good. You're not trying to say anything it's going to be a bulletin board material type of thing. At least in this case, it's happened in other games. But I think that Ohio State's defense is certainly good. There's a reason they're in the national championship. They did, as Nick Saban said it this week about the secondary. They played well enough against Clemson to get here. The front seven was great, getting to Trevor Lawrence, stopping ETN, and the secondary held as much as they needed to, and I think that's the key here. It's nice of Mac Jones to give a compliment like that, but I'm sure when he looks at the film and sees kind of the way that quarterbacks have been able to pull apart this Ohio State secondary at times, and they've certainly made plays. Shaun Wade's had a handful of interceptions. Sevyn Banks had one against Clemson. They forced turnovers. So, there are certain things that Ohio State does well, but, to say it's the best defense they've faced, I think is a little bit of fluff, so to speak, as you head into a big game and not wanting to disparage your opponent.
In the mold of a Justin Fields being tabbed as the guy, he's the great quarterback. He's number one in the country. You could say the same about Najee Harris. Number one rated running back coming out of high school, has fulfilled all the expectations, scored a zillion touchdowns this year, has had a great all-time career at Alabama. Trey Sermon, on the other hand, very good player, comes from Oklahoma, but always split time with somebody, and boom, Big Ten championship game, 331 on the board. And then I would make the argument that he may have ran even better against Clemson. He ran just like a man possessed. So now we've got a bit of a running back duel between an established star and Trey Sermon, who's just come on like gangbusters.
It's an opportunity, I think, for Trey Sermon. And obviously he's shown a lot these last couple games, but an opportunity for him to showcase himself further. This is a senior, a guy who transferred here for one last year. And technically, because of NCAA rules this season, anybody can come back. But I think Trey Sermon has an eye on the NFL after this game. And, he's looked good these last couple games. But if you can do this against Alabama, I think people really start to notice, especially, again, not going head to head, but if you outperform Najee Harris, who, I assume will be one of the top running backs taken in the NFL draft. I think that certainly helps. And obviously, your main goal in all this is to help your team. Ohio State's offense these last in the last game at least, has been much more balanced. And you can even go back to Michigan State when Trey Sermon first had his first 100-yard game, got his first touchdown. Really, that was the first okay, this kid's starting to find it moment. I think when this offense is balanced, when Justin Fields can worry about distributing the ball to various weapons, and you can keep defenses on their toes because you can also run the ball, something Ohio State wasn't doing well early in the year. That's when the Buckeyes are really hard to defend. Same with Alabama. So I think it's going to be interesting because you want to get out there and you want to get all these different guys involved, but I think it comes down to basic football, right? Getting the ball to running back, moving down the field, and then that usually opens up the passing game. And I think you've seen that with both of these teams and how they've executed this year.
We like to talk about the throwers and catchers and the speed guys, but that Alabama offensive line, defensive line play against Notre Dame, and Notre Dame is really good on both sides of the ball in the trenches, and Alabama won the game because they have more skill and more speed, but they at least made it probably more than a stalemate against Notre Dame. Ohio State finished off pretty much what they established last year against Clemson. They won the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball, certainly the offensive line against Clemson's D-line last year, but then where that advantage was pretty obvious last year, it was a domination on both sides of the line, and especially the offensive line against Clemson. So we are talking about, again, the best of the best in the trenches, where it will just be a battle
Well, and I think when you get to this point, you're usually talking about that in the national championship game. I mean, it's hard to get to that final game of the season in any football, really, if you don't have those players in the trenches. And Ohio State's defensive line really impressed me in that Clemson game. I knew that these guys were talented. They'd obviously done very well against the run this year. They've pressured quarterbacks successfully. They just weren't always getting there, the defensive ends. They got to Trevor Lawrence. They made him uncomfortable. They knocked the ball out of his hand 4 times. It was a really impressive performance, and one that will need to carry over to Monday night. Alabama's offensive line just won the Joe Moore Award. They're considered the best offensive line in the country. So certainly a big challenge for Ohio State. And on the flip side, I think this Alabama defensive line, and watching them more closely the last several days, is good. Not quite the level that we've seen from Alabama defensive lines before. Still very good. Obviously, there's a reason they're here. But with the way Ohio State's offensive line is played of late, especially if you get a guy like Harry Miller back who missed the Clemson game, even though Matt Jones stepped in and played very well, you get that kind of cohesion along the front 5 there. That's where you may be able to have some advantages, open some holes for Trey Sermon, keep Justin Fields protected. But I think both sides are going to be very close. I think it's going to be which team can win more often than lose, as opposed to completely dominating the game. I just don't see it happening that way in this one.
Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Please smash that like button, and of course subscribe here. Hit that bell for the notifications. We got Pat Murphy on the line from Bucknuts 247 Sports. The reason the line for a over/under is pushing 80 is there's an expectation that both wide receiver cores are going to abuse the opposing secondary. Is there any reason to believe that it's not going to be a track meet and it's just going to be guys trying to corral Devontae Smith, Garrett Wilson? We could go on both sides of this deal.
I don't think so. I wrote the other day about, essentially defense may not be completely gone in this game, but it's probably going to be fairly optional. And so what for defense wins championships, right? These two, as I mentioned, the rush defenses for both teams are pretty good. But it's that the secondaries, and Patrick Surtain, the Alabama cornerback, is very good. Up for a number of national awards. Today, Chris Olave compared him to Jeff Okudah, who the Ohio State cornerback from last year, who went number 3 overall in the NFL draft. So that there's certainly talent there. It's just the secondary as a whole for either team haven't lived up to expectations. And as you mentioned with some of those names, there's some very good receivers. We already talked about the quarterbacks in this game. So yeah, I can't see one of these defenses all of a sudden becoming an elite secondary. Alabama has been better of late. I think you've seen improvements, and I think you probably would have from Ohio State secondary if they'd played that second half of a 12-game schedule that they missed with this year. But I think the passing offenses are going to rule the day in this one, just because the rushing defenses are significantly better for both sides.
And Pat, just to run back to the quarterback comparison, and what might normally be an advantage for Ohio State might be taken away in this game would be that Mac Jones is tremendous, but Justin Fields can run it. But considering the injury, it's going to be interesting to see how they're going to approach that portion of it.
Yeah, Ryan Day was asked today about, if you call the game any differently. And, he basically gave the, we're going to call the game to win. And we're going to figure out the best way to do that answer. Talking to Justin Fields today, it sounded like he feels good. He said, and it was a similar answer to what he gave after the Northwestern game leading into the Sugar Bowl against Clemson. I'll be ready by Monday. So you know how that turned out with how he played against Clemson. But in terms of running the ball, Ohio State really hasn't done it a ton. They've done it when they needed to. Obviously, the Michigan State game when you're missing 3 offensive linemen, he had to move around a lot and got going rushing the ball. But when Justin Fields committed to Ohio State, I expect it to be almost a Braxton Miller-esque approach where, obviously he can throw the ball, but, you're going to use the legs a lot. And some of that had to do with the lack of depth last year at quarterback. And this year, they haven't really needed to. So, I think that we'll have to wait and see how he's looking with the injury. But from what Ohio State has been saying, it doesn't sound like it's bothering him all that much. I think you saw him wincing on throws and things like that in the Clemson game. But if he needs to run, I think at this point in the season, you're playing for all the marbles. It's win or go home. I think he'll take what he can do, or do what he can do. Do what he has to do, I guess. And, if that means running the ball more, then I think he'll probably do it and fight through the pain.
Pat, we know you got so much going on, not just with the national championship game, but with football and basketball on a regular basis. So appreciate you stopping by. And again, everybody check out Pat's work at Bucknuts on 247 Sports.
Yep. Anytime. I always enjoy coming on.